Okay, everybody, welcome to the Introduction to Aboriginal Health Research Ethics Committee. My name is Alwin Chong, as see on the page. With me is Harley, and I'm not too sure whether Amy from Lowitja are here. But before we get started, I just want to do an acknowledgement of the country. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are all meeting on today. We recognise their continuing connection to the land, water and community, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging as the First Nations traditional custodians of what we now call Australia. So again, welcome everybody. This is just an introductory. It's not a, it's just to give you an idea about some of the, some of the main issues that Aboriginal health has always been confronted with. And continues to be confronted with, even though there's still a lot more, there's a lot more information now about ethics. So this just give you an introductory. Just before we get started, I will open up maybe 2 or 3 parts of the presentation for people to ask questions or to give me comments, a whole range of stuff. So I just want to point out that we're in a safe zone here, so we just want to be, if anything's respectful, just be mindful that somebody's opinion is their opinion, or somebody's comments is their comment. So let's be respectful and respect privacy, and just be mindful of how you go about criticising or saying something about somebody else. So it's a safe zone. What we're going to do too is there's a little poll that we're just going to ask you whether you just click on. Just get us an indication of what you are and what you do. It's just a one little click, so it's just a click and flick. I think Harley, are you going to show that poll?
You'll have to do it on your end, Alwin.
So where do I get that?
So if you just get out of your, it'll be down the bottom for you next to the share screen button.
Okay, I'll get out.
You see a little button and it says poll.
Okay, so if everybody can do this. Oh no, it's never come up.
Not there. So where it says chat and screen share should be between those two.
I've got the poll, but it's not. It just says I'm logged into another device.
Oh, okay. Perhaps it's not working.
Okay, then we won't worry about it then. We'll just get on with the show. We were going to just do a poll just to see where everybody's coming from, but that's fine. Like I said, it's an introductory. And like I said, we want to be really respectful, and we want to go through and just maybe have quick conversations, ask questions. But I'll just try and give you some of the basic stuff about the Health Research Ethics Committee. There are crossovers with AATSIS, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, with their ethics, but mainly we're talking about research into the health area for us, but there's very little difference. Okay, so what's going on here? Not working. There we go. So basically, what I'm going to try and do is just give you an idea about what are some of the ethics best practice. We'll talk about an overview of the journey of where we came from. Just talk about some of the current systems and process. I'll just go through maybe a couple of the known challenges. And they still are some of the challenges. And then when I finish off, I'm just going to give you 3 examples, 3 different types of ethical examples. Now, what we can do is we can actually send these slides to you if you want a copy of them. And there's nothing major in them that we can, if you request a copy of these slides, we can send them to you. They've been around for a long time, I've been talking about this stuff now for the last 20 odd years, so there's nothing major about it. Just make sure that there's other people coming through. Okay, so I think there's a few people joined us again. Okay, so basically you can find quite a few definitions of ethics if you go into Google or go into some of the ethics example. Oh, before I forget, you can also go into the Lowitja ethics page as well, and it's got some resources in there, some paid and some unpaid. So you can go in there and get an idea. It also has all the guidelines. So I'm not going to talk about the guidelines today, but if you want to go and see what are the latest guidelines for Aboriginal health research ethics from the NHMRC, then you can go in. But I think the main one for us today is a set of principles to ensure research is safe, respectable, and responsible for Aboriginal communities. You know, there's the thing about responsible, I suppose, is the one thing that hasn't been happening in Aboriginal communities for quite a while. And so since the 1980s, there's been these Aboriginal research ethics committees in order to try and do that. And what they have done is that they've made culture a significant element of the ethics process as well. Okay, so I think the document that I'm going to use today is the one by Jamison et al. And it talks about these 10 principles about how to engage Aboriginal people. So we're talking about being respectful, we're talking about being effective as well. You know, so some of the research that's been done in Aboriginal communities has never been effective. That people have just got money to do something and they've just decided that they'll go and do it in an Aboriginal community, and it hasn't led to anything. You know, it hasn't contributed to any discussion. It hasn't made any changes to the. So I think, you know, often PhD students get the blame for that, but in actual fact, it's one of those things where towards the end of the financial year, government makes money available, and people then go and say, "Well, we can get money from the government," when they're trying to get rid of some of the excess money, and then they'll apply for money, especially people who have track records. So then they'll apply for this money, and then they'll say, "Well, let's go and do this little bit of study with somebody." And of course, on many occasions, it hasn't been thought about. It hasn't been communicated very well with the community, and so it hasn't been very effective. So it's been done it's been done very, very quickly, and so that's probably the thing about being effective. So it has to be culturally respectable. It has to be relevant, and of course, the relevancy comes from the community. You actually can get that. But the 10 principles, I suppose, are addressing priorities. You know, so most communities now with peak bodies have a research agenda. So you actually can go to these peak state bodies, and you can actually look and see what their priorities is. The thing that I have to point out here is often those priorities don't match with the government's. You know, so when you go and talk to a community, what their idea is may not be the same as what the government's talking about. So it's good to be able to go and talk to some of these communities, find out what they think is the key element to doing some of these research. So that's been probably the biggest issue, because if you go out to the remote areas, often it costs money to go out to talk to these communities, and often researchers are reluctant to go out there. But now that COVID has opened us up to the internet, there's all these Zooms and team meetings you can do to do that. But yeah, in the past, most of the research issues was always done rural or urban, and remote areas missed out. So the priorities for those people would be different too because of the remoteness. I can think of one example where we went to a community and they wanted to do research around swimming pools. And of course, to go out there to try and get all that information, trying to talk with the community meant that you had to go out at least twice in order to catch people in the community, as well as catch up with the peak body that was meeting, and then find out that the swimming pool was linked with the education part of it. And so then when you get permission from the education department to go and do it, would mean that you have to do at least 2 or 3. And most of the researchers we were working with didn't want to do that because it cost them money before they actually, and they didn't have that money either. So they were working on research project money, so that swimming pool project fell over because we didn't have any project money to go out and find out how to go about talking with the community and getting this information. So finding out what is the priority for the community may not be what the government thinks is, and may not be what we think that is. So it's important for you to be able to find out what the priority is and find out whether you have the ability to be able to go out and work with the community. And of course, I suppose we talked about being respectful. I think the one thing about being respectful partnership is that when you go out and talk to a peak body, maybe a community board member or board from a community, just have to remember that there's other parts of the community who may not agree with them as well. So, the respectful partnership isn't just with the peak body, it's also trying to find out whether there's any other people in the community or other groups of people in the community who may not have the same view. And so that respectfulness and partnership is quite critical. Just making the assumption that you've got permission from the board to go in this little community, there may be other people who might. It makes it very hard to conduct research then, if that's the case, because your sample size is probably not going to be as good as it should be. The other part that comes up all the time is this capacity building. Often you talk about capacity building with research partners. Most researchers always considered it to be capacity building of their project. And so they'll try and bring an Aboriginal person on the project. But the capacity building is also for the community. It's about leaving something behind when you actually go into these communities. Probably the best example I've seen is up in Eastern Arnhem Land, where they train people to do interviews. And so every time researchers go there now, they've got these groups of people who are able to conduct interviews for them in these communities. So they speak the language, they know the participants, they're able to engage with the participants quite easily because there's that trust has been there before the project, and so it makes it easier to do. But often, often when people are talking about capacity building, they think that we're talking about building the research project up rather than. But again, I'm saying that you still need to try and improve, increase the Aboriginal participation in the project as well. So if you can get capacity building within the project as well as in the community, that's a win-win. Probably the other big issue here is the flexibility in the study. I think most people now know about sorry business, but also there's no-go zones in certain parts of the community in Australia at certain times of the year. For instance, you don't travel to the lands, to the Central Australia area between November and February. It's just a no-go zone. You don't get nothing done. So you've got to try and factor that into your study. So if you're going to be doing a study over 3 years, you know that you're going to be missing a period of time there. So if you know that, you then can plan for it. So do most of your field work, and then you can then take it back to the office and start doing some other stuff back in the office. But yeah, there's the flexibility in the implementation. That's one example. I think there's other ones. There's other examples about not being able to get ethics approval from either an AREC or a HREC. So yeah, from an Aboriginal Research Ethics Committee or a Human Research Ethics Committee that is usually based within a university. So flexibility is probably something that you need to factor into your funding as well. So if you're going to get funded for 3 years, just making sure that you have a bit of time up your sleeve to start writing the report at the end of it. And of course, I think one of the other big problems is that we're respecting communities' past and present experience of research. Now, one of the biggest issues that has come up probably about 20 odd years ago now was Aboriginal people talking about how over-researched they were. But in actual fact, most of the research that was done wasn't about health outcomes. Like they weren't getting good evidence about how to inform government about how to improve the health outcomes in their community. Most of it was done again, by things that were researchers just winning money and trying to find a community. The government saying this is what we want to do, and so people just get the money because they can. But at the end of the day, it doesn't help them. Chronic illness is probably over-researched now in Aboriginal communities. We know what causes it. We know how to manage it. So you don't need to have any more of that. We know that chronic illness is a poverty issue. So we don't need more. But there's other elements of chronic illness that we should be doing more research on. I mean, for instance, the child protection area, we have very little research evidence about that, and everybody thinks, oh, I know it's but it leads to a whole range of, when these kids go into care and they stay in long-term care, they come out and have very little skills about surviving, and they then are part of that. Or the other element of the other end of that spectrum is birthing. Young children being born into poverty, and or young children being born underweight, pregnancy journeys. So there's a lot of research that still hasn't been done. But when you talk to some of these Aboriginal communities, they'll say to you, no, we don't want researchers come here because we're over researched. But that goes to understanding what the priority is. So you can talk to the peak body because they have been able to do a lot of this work for you over the last 20 years. And you can then also then work out whether that priority fits into your expertise or partnerships. I think partnerships with other researchers is probably another one of those good messages that we could actually get out. I suppose from a funding point of view, even from a funding point of view and an Aboriginal community point of view, is ensuring that the timelines aren't jeopardising. So if something gets held up because of sorry business or something having trouble with the organisation that's been supporting you, having some kind of extension in your timeline, because the timelines usually are related to funding. So if the money runs out, then obviously you can't do what you want to do. So then, and I suppose also being very flexible about your timelines as well. If you have to have 3 reports done by the end of the project, and you're running out of time, maybe it's time for you to sit down with the organisation and sit down and say, well, and the funding body and say, well, would 2 be better? Would be better for us to have 2 done rather than none done in that time period. So negotiating with the funding body as well as the community. And I think the biggest one about all that is that the timeline is about feedback to the community. You want to also give yourself time to let the community know what you've been able to find, because if it is rigorous research, if it is being able to get the community on side and you've found something that's interesting, that is an opportunity for the community to take to the government as well. And so that's something is that you want feedback to the community to be part of this time frame as well. And so the community then has an opportunity to decide whether they want to do with them. And like I said, pregnancy is probably the one big area where we can get big bangs for our buck, but understanding what those are. For instance, we know that majority of Aboriginal women don't get very many antenatal checkups. So the average for an Aboriginal woman is about 4, whereas the recommended is about 6 or 7. So that impacts on the community. So that's just an example about understanding communication and just letting the community know what was. So the other one is ownership, and often data. Data is one of the areas where communities want to know who owns it so they can use it if there's anything interesting coming out of it. But the other one is authorship. When you publish, we all know that publishing is track record for researchers, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt to have some Aboriginal members on the authorship. So even though you're wanting to try and get track record so you can win more money, the same goes for the Aboriginal community. Like having Aboriginal authorship is also just as important, because they then could be the go-to person for the government, because they've been involved in this project as well. So we understand authorship, we understand track record, because this will lead to the next funding grant for you. But at the same time, it doesn't hurt to bring some of these community people along with you. And that is about negotiating. That is about going out and talking to the community about who should be on. So if you've done a bit of capacity building with somebody, you're wanting to try and give them some kind of credibility about what the training is, then that may be the way to go. And I think you want to have especially for multi-sites, you want to have a facilitated partnership that manages these multiple sites. You don't want to have to be going around and setting up 3 or 4 different sites, having different. You want to be able to have like a management process that can help you with all sites, rather than going around to different sites, different time, which costs time and money, and that then impacts on your funding rounds as well, your funding process. So I think those 10 things come out of this document of Jemison et al. They are pretty comprehensive. They give you a whole range of things to think about. Like I said, they link up very well with the NHMRC guidelines. They also link up with making tracks, the paper that was developed by Lowitja to help NHMRC. So those documents are on our webpage, and you can find them. I think the Jamison one is on our page as well, and you can look at these. These are just the 10 criteria that I've pulled out, but there is a whole range of writing that goes behind this. But because we don't have very much time, I just thought I'd pull these 10 ones and just go through them pretty quickly with you. But yeah, I think I'm very keen to hear what ethics best practice means to anybody who wants to have a say. If there's anybody who wants to say something, add something to it. No, okay. Just I thought, what ethics means to me. I mean, I've worked in this area now for, I know, about 30 years, so ethics for me is pretty clear. But I thought, if there were some areas where you thought maybe was borderline, where you wasn't too sure about it, we could have clarified, or we could have had a discussion about it. I'm not the expert, but we could have then went through and just had a bit of a discussion.
And if people aren't too comfortable with talking out loud, feel free to type it in the chat as well.
Okay, so somebody's written no questions, but that's okay. So we've got another little break later on. So if you think of something, we can address it there too. I mean, I suppose at the end of the day, hopefully you don't get sick of me talking. Yeah, so I think depending who you're talking about, who you're talking with, ethics practice could mean different things to different people. I think when you go to a community, most community people would probably think that ethics is about cultural rights, cultural practices, ensuring that their cultural practices is and their cultural understanding is very much the forefront to some of these ethics guidelines. I think if you went and talked to young students, I think most of them would be very clear about what ethics is. It's about getting approval to go out and do a research project. But I think the broader element is that you can get right involved in ethics and ethnicists. But at the end of the day, the guidelines is probably your best guide. You go in there and it tells you what are some of the things that you need to do in order to go out and talk to participants. I think that probably the other element of it is that people often are living in a community. They see something that they think would be interesting to do an ethics project, do a research project. So they start taking notes, and then they go off and get money to do the project, and then come back and say, well, I already started collecting data already collecting people's stories, and then you tell them, no, you didn't have ethical approval to do it. You shouldn't have been asking them those questions. You needed to go out, get your methodology, get all your stuff in order, then come back and then ask them the question. And he said, well, they were just telling me. And I said, well, if you had any inkling that you wanted to do this, you should have told them, wait until I get ethics approval. Getting ethics approval after you've collected information doesn't right. There was an example in the hospital with the when they were doing autopsies, and part of the autopsies at one of the hospitals here in South Australia, the main hospital here in South Australia, what they used to do is they'd keep little human little tissues, and so part of the autopsy they would save those tissues just in case somebody challenged them, or since over a period of time they had all these tissues, and two researchers saw these tissue parts there and started analysing them, and so it created a really big kerfuffle here in South Australia about these two researchers looking at these tissue parts without approval from hospital, without approval from the ethics committee, and without approval from the government, because the government actually owned those. And so then what they had to do was they had to go and analyse, find out who owned those tissue parts, and find out that they were, some of them were Aboriginal tissues, and so they had to give those tissues back to the community. Rather than having them sitting around in the lab. So that's just one of those examples about, these guys thought these tissues are just sitting here, let's analyse them. And of course, they didn't have approval to do it. Then you hear them talking about, there were some interesting things coming out of it, but they can't publish it because they never had approval to go and do it. So there are all these little things happening around ethics, but at the end of the day, you just need to make sure you go through the right process. And the right process is written down very clear in NHMRC, the National Health and Medical Research Council, on their webpage. If you can't find it in there, you can go on to the Lowitja Ethics webpage, and it shows you what these guidelines are. And then there's a couple of documents there that also give you some feelers about what are some of the key elements that you need to be aware of when you're writing this. But yeah, ethics best practice is about writing up your document. Be very clear about what your aims and objectives are. Being very clear about what the methodology is. How you're going to extract the information from the community. Like how you're going to go out there. Are you going to do interviews? Are you going to do a randomised trial? Are you going to do are you going to do group sessions? At the moment, one of the catchphrases here at the moment is there's this yarning circles, which is basically group sessions. But you just got to be very clear about how you're going to do it. You've got to be very clear how you're going to analyse the data, and you've got to be very clear about what you're going to do with the data, and then what are you going to do with that information. So I think that the ANROs, the National Research Group up against, they go and talk to women about violence, but there's a very fine line that they have to be very careful about, because talking to women about their experience can not only be, it's challenging at the best of times. So whether that contributes to improving and stopping domestic violence down the track is debatable. So they have to be very careful about how they go about talking to women about their life experience. And of course, most of us are pretty concerned that they're talking to women about that rather than talking about domestic violence generally. But they get ethical approval to do it. So most of us, who are concerned about it, can't complain about it. Okay, so I think that's what best practice is. It's about making sure that you're very clear about what you're going to do when you get to the community and how you're going to do it. Most of the times you get permission. Most of the time you get a champion. Most of the time who can help you They navigate the community. Most of the time, it's about informed consent. It's about being very clear that you're describing something to the participants. Often we say it has to be in plain English, but if they don't have English as their first language, then maybe you need a language speaker as well. So they're those things that are probably the best practice. But anyway, what I want to do now, I just want to go back in time and just talk about why we have these ethics committees now, the Aboriginal Health Research Ethics Committees. And just bear in mind, I'm not being disrespectful to any of the social scientists, but it's just the journey that that Aboriginal people have come down since the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s. Because what you have to remember is that we were still under the protection laws up until the late 1960s, when the referendum was conducted here in Australia. So, I think the anthropology department was established in Sydney in about the 1920s. In Melbourne, I think it was back in the 1940s. And so between the 1920s and 1930s, with the rollout of the protection laws, Aboriginal people being rounded up and moved to mission stations or reserves, there was this big concern that Aboriginal people were losing their culture. So a lot of these anthropologists who, when they're doing their PhDs, then started moving into Central Australia mainly. And so they were starting to try and record the Aboriginal culture while it was a relatively pristine state. And so the 1970s, we see a large cohort of anthropologists. And of course, they stayed out there for a long time too, so they embedded them mainly because of the tyranny of distance. So if you're coming from Sydney or Melbourne, you're going out to Alice Springs or you're going up to Kimberley's, you just couldn't go out there on a weekend and go and do some research and come back and write it up and go back and confirm it. So most of the process was done that they would go out to these communities, stay out in these communities for a long time, write up their documents, write up all their notes. Then when they went back to their offices, they would then document. So the concern was back when the Aboriginal Health Research Committee was that they never were able to confirm they were never able to confirm what they had written down. They never gave the opportunity to retract or to add to it. And of course, that's one of the reasons why the research groups were then starting to say, well, we need more guidelines. So we need the NHMRC to come along and make sure that now all these researchers got permission. They got ethics approval. They had money to go out to the community. They became well embedded in the community. They were well liked in the community. It's just that when they were writing it up, it was their interpretation of what they'd seen and what they'd heard. And of course, so you hear much later, you hear some of these community members saying, well, I never said that, or I didn't realize they were writing that down. So the informed consent, I suppose, was just taken then, because once they were in there for a couple of months, they were talking to people. And then the other part about all that is too, once somebody went to a community, it meant that that person was going to be writing about that particular community, and they wouldn't. Somebody else, you'd have to go somewhere else then to find another community. So they did all the right things. But the one thing that came out of all this, and it still is coming out of all this, is that again, it's that publication. It's that these anthropologists in particular, right in the early stages anyway, they were the ones that were then writing about Aboriginal culture. And so it wasn't until much later when we had more Aboriginal researchers coming through that they were then writing about their own community. But yeah, so going out to the community for months at a time, writing their notes, then going back and then interpreting what they'd heard, because they just couldn't pick a phone up and ask somebody. And of course the publications. So they then would, I think Jeremy Beckett is probably the best example. He went up to the Torres Straits and he embedded himself in the community. He was very well liked. He wrote about the Torres Straits, and it was very well known as the Torres Strait researcher. But again, these these people, they loved him up there, and so they gave him all the information that he needed. But he got benefit out of it. And when you look at the social sciences area, most of that is about culture, and so I think the one benefit to Aboriginal communities is that after the 1970s, when Aboriginal people were coming out of the protection period, the stolen generations period, we then see a lot of those people wanting to find their heritage, wanting to find where they come from, wanting to find their family. And so the very first place you would actually go to is all these writings. In the 1920s, we had Norman Tyndale travelling around. He was commissioned by the Commonwealth Government to go travelling around Australia to the mission stations and reserves and documenting. So they wanted to do a population census. And so, and a lot of the communities I went to in Northern Australia, most of the men weren't there because they were out working. So what he wrote about wasn't challenged, but wasn't very comprehensive. But the Tyndale documents, the Tyndale collection now is probably the very first place where everybody goes, and then they'll go and try and find some of these other authors. So it wasn't unethical, but there was few things in there that were done that Aboriginal people were complaining about, and that meant they wanted the NHMRC to come along and do more about adding these guidelines. Because up until then, we never had any guidelines specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research. And of course, about the late 1970s, early 1980s, when more and more people started moving into towns, we see the hospital separation data showing a lot more data around the unhealthiness of Aboriginal people. Because they were poor, they'd come into town, they were very poor, they had very little money, if any, and the only place they could go to get any medical support was to hospitals. And many of them just turned up when it was critical, rather than going in there like you can go to a doctor and get ongoing services. So we then see large numbers of hospital separation in the hospital separation data. And of course, then that signals then the increase in the number of health research in our community. So by the mid to late 1980s, we then see the changeover in our communities to a lot of this health research. And of course, then that signals to the NHMRC they need to do something about it. And so by the early 1990s, the NHMRC then sets up the guidelines then. So we then have these guidelines that then guides research in Aboriginal communities. So the volume of work coming out of it, and of course, it wasn't unusual to see 3 or 4 researchers coming into an Aboriginal community over a 5 or 6 year period, talking about the same type of stuff, and so that then leads to the Aboriginal peak bodies then saying, well, okay, let's slow this down a bit. Let's try and get a research criteria that we can then give to researchers and to say, well, if you want to do research in our community, these are the topics that you should be looking at. But yeah, I think the background is important. Like I said, the Tyndale, when he went around to Australia in the 1920s, his work now is probably the go-to place. The Tyndale collection is held here in South Australia, and it's been digitised. And of course, everybody rings up now to find out, even to confirm sometimes. But again, Tyndale did make mistakes as well. When he went to my community, he talked to a whole range of people, but because it was mostly pastoral, a lot of the men were at home, and he made the assumption that the community that we belong to was a amalgamation of 2 different groups. So he called our group Ag Women, and in actual fact, our group is Wakaman, and has always been Wakaman. So he gets them wrong a little bit at times. But Horton has updated the map if you want to go and look at that. But It's available through the AATSIS webpage. But I think, you know, when you look at Jeremy Beckett and you look at Tyndale, you know, Tyndale did the round Australia trip, Beckett did Australia. But you know, like I said, the benefits to Aboriginal people was that they now were able to go to these documents. I think what it did lead to for a little while there was that it gave everybody, because they were writing about traditional lifestyle, which people believed had disappeared in urban situations in particular. You know, there was this joke that the real Aboriginal people lived in Central Australia, which wasn't true. It's just that they hadn't been moved very far from their community and still had control over a lot of their practices. Yeah, they were just able to continue moving on in their life. Even when missionaries went out there, the missionaries still allowed them to practice it, whereas in urban and rural and urban areas, that was taken out of them when they were to reserves. But you know, it was just something that had to be challenged when it was starting to be talked about. So that's probably the background. You know, like I said, you know, there was some of these you know, and I have to make sure I mention it, that a lot of these anthropologists who went to these communities cared about the communities too. You know, like I'm not putting my anthropologists down. It was just part of the times. You know, they just couldn't pick up a phone and ring back and say, well, you know, I heard you. I remember you say this, but you know, can you explain that a bit further or something? You know, so a lot of these anthropologists really cared about the community and really cared about, and they still do. So when you go and see these anthropology conferences, now you see them all talking about these communities that they spent, you know, 30, 40 years with. Yeah, so that's the background, I think, which gives you an understanding about how it gives you an indication about how these, you know, guidelines came about, the NHMRC guidelines, and it also gives you an idea about how Aboriginal people now are trying to take control of that and having a lot more input into the areas of research, and being in control of what is being researched and how it's been researched. Okay, so like I said, you know, in order to be registered with the NHMRC, you need to fit through their guidelines. In order, the ethics committees are made up. There's 7 key people that you have on your committee, and then it becomes certified. So you register with the NHMRC, you meet these requirements, and then you get certified, and then you know you're mandated under the NHMRC. Now the other thing about all this is that the Aboriginal Health Research Ethics Committee, they are mandated under the NHMRC and have the ability to look at any application. It doesn't have to be Aboriginal. It's just that they specialise in the Aboriginal issues for their community. But you know, if somebody was to send them a document that was just a broad population, a larger population, they can do it. Often they're so busy that they don't do it, but it doesn't. The other part about it is, you know, if you go onto our web page, ethics web page, you actually can find some of the guidelines and protocols. I think a major part of the protocol is actually, one of the biggest one is the engaging Aboriginal communities when you're trying to write up your funding grant. You know, try and meet with the communities while you're doing that, so that you have them involved in, and if you do win the money. The criticism has always been that it costs money and time to go out to a community, sit down with a community and go through what you want them to do. But at the same time, if you win the money, but yeah, the NHMRC grants are very hard to win. So because you need track record, and you also need a pretty strong community involvement. But again, you know, you should be doing that. But at the end of the day, we don't know. Some people try and win the money first. Now, the other part of it is that these HARECs, these Human Research Ethics Committee, under the amended guidelines about 2 years ago, they only need they don't need an Aboriginal person on their ethics committee. So under the guidelines, the 7 members that I was telling you about that are critical to having at every meeting or at most meetings, they don't need to have an Aboriginal person there. So when, especially universities that get some of these, often they will ask you to go to the Aboriginal Research Ethics Committee and get sign off from them before they will sign off on it. So that's just something to bear in mind, because and I suppose just from a convenience point of view, that's what I would do anyway. If you were doing that, if it had a percentage of Aboriginal population that you're going to come across, I would go to an AREC first, if you got one in your state. And of course, the training element of this, AYATS is probably the area that has been established as Aboriginal people were talking about all these anthropologists coming out, because it wasn't just anthropologists then. So there was archaeologists, and then there was linguists. Because at the end of the day, linguists were very curious about the language too, and so I think they are able to define that there's 25 different language groups in Australia, and so that sets off a bit of a discussion with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well. And of course, there's other things. I mean, what else? I mean, I would think about partnerships. I think making sure that you have the right partners, because well, let's take one example. Cancer. Cancer is a growing illness in Aboriginal communities, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and so there's a lot more research going on there now. But again, most of the information about cancer is about smoking. It's about healthy. It's about water, good quality water. So at the end of the day, no one knows for sure what causes cancer. So my example is that my grandfather was a chain smoker, and he died in his mid-90s, and he died from a heart attack. So when I tell these cancer experts, they say, well, smoking eventually killed him, but didn't kill him from cancer. But I think there are these things now that are coming out, and I suppose the other one is Huntington's disease. Even though it's not very well known in Australia or in Aboriginal communities, so there's diseases that people are wanting to look at. But from a protocol point of view, it's very similar. I mean, I think I talked about ANROs wanting to talk to women about their experience of DV. And a lot of these women are talking about their experience. But like at the end of the day, how does that life experience lead into, and of course, I suppose that's topical today, given that the Prime Minister has behaved appalling about some of this stuff. So I think so women's violence against women, I suppose, is something that when I was talking to ANROs and the research director of ANROs, that they need to be very careful about how they navigate those fields, because you can if you talk about women's a particular experience, it can actually give you a false sense. And of course, from my point of view, with us working with young men, young fatherhood, it's about prevention rather than trying to deal with a problem today. But those two just don't match. They don't meet in the middle here in Australia, because the government isn't seeing it as a major issue yet. Okay, so the current systems and processes, I think you can go to the NHMRC to talk about and watch what they do. You can read about ARECs, or you can even go onto the AATSIS webpage and look at what they do. That gives you an idea about some of the currents and systems, but they are important. I think if you're a researcher with the university and you want to go out to an Aboriginal community, you just need to be very mindful about what you have to do and how you have to do it and when you have to do it, because a lot of these ethics committees now have a very short timelines, turnaround timelines. Okay, so Just want to these are just some of the known challenges around trying to create. I talked about students doing their PhD students. I think often PhD students will dovetail onto other research projects. That's probably the best example that you can do. If you're doing research around a large cohort and you get a student to pick out one of those particular topics, that's a good example. Like you can get ethics approval quite easily because you've got a supervisor who knows the topic, and the community student knows the topic really well. Chances are they'll get confirmed quite easily, and then can go off and do the research in the 2 or 3 years period that they're expected to. The big one, I suppose, is the research participants. When we go into the community, it's about trying to recruit. It's about informed consent. It's about having an information sheet that very clearly explains what you're going to do. It's about confirming all the time. One of the issues that comes up quite regularly is payment. Wanting to reimburse or give participants some money for doing it. You just have to be very careful about that, because you could actually bring people out of the woodwork who may not have what you're wanting from them. That's something you need to take advice from an AREC or from an Aboriginal Health Research Ethics Committee about. You want to reimburse somebody for their time, but you just got to be careful. I think the other thing, since the Northern Territory intervention, a lot of ethics committees are saying to researchers not to give these cards, these gift cards that has access to alcohol or cigarettes. Now, unless you're researching in Northern Territory, I don't see how that can be an issue. That's just something that the Commonwealth government has introduced as a way of trying to manipulate communities. But if you're not in Northern Territory, I don't think that's an issue. And of course, we've been through the researchers, and of course we've been through, and of course the big one for researchers is not engaging the community appropriately. Like I said in the past, procurement money would come available. As organisations, as departments had to give money back to the government, by about May, there'd be this surplus of money that the government needed to get rid of before June. Otherwise, that would be taken off their funding round for the next year. So they'd be trying to get rid of it as quickly as they could. And it was people in the know, it was people who, and so people would just apply for money willy-nilly without having any idea about what they wanted to do. So then the government would give them this money, and then they would go off and try and find something to do. So then they'd be running around crazy trying to get everybody together, say, well, what can we do? So that's part of that engagement, not engaging these people, the communities very well. So, being respectful and also being exclusionist. I think, saying that Alwin can come to our meeting, but somebody else can't. I think if they're representatives from the community, then they're the people you have to work with. Some of them may be hard to work with, but that's the nature of a community. That's just not in an Aboriginal community either, by the way. That's right across the board. Okay, so I think the known challenges. I mean, AREC membership. We know that there used to be in the guidelines. They used to have at least one Aboriginal. The guidelines would say one Aboriginal person or a minister of religion. And most ARECs would go for an Aboriginal person, but now that's not written in there anymore. And so, but most ARECs still have an Aboriginal person on. It's a bit unfair to have one Aboriginal person on there, but at least one's a bit better than none. So these are just some of the issues that I thought were some of the challenges. I think the third dot point down, actually the second dot point down, who is the community? Like I mentioned that once to you before, that when you go out and you talk to a board, so the board invites you to come out and talk to them, because you're trying to get a letter of support from them. So you talk, but often, like any democracy, it doesn't represent all the community. So you want to be able to talk to somebody and say, well, who else should we talk to in the community? Because the board is just an elected member, they're just elected members of the community. So the community is made up of other people as well. So just bear that in mind. So just try and get a broader representation of the, and I'm not talking about being on your working group, I'm talking about people who you should go through informed consent and information about the project so that you have as many people on side as possible. But the third dot point is the one that often still happens today, which is quite upsetting actually. So for research projects that aren't wholly solely about Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, but are going to have a percentage of the population who identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and there is this perception that to get ethical approval from an AREC, it'll take too long. Now, getting approval for, if you've got multi-sites, can take anything up to a year to get ethics approval, but that's not an AREC's problem. That's just the nature of timing in most of the AREC. But yeah, so the problem is that if you've got about 10% of Aboriginal population in your data and you don't analyse it, first of all, that's something that Aboriginal people could have used to try and find out where to next. So if you're doing something that is critical to the Aboriginal population in the health area, for instance, that's something that we need. So there's that question first. So if you're not going to analyse it and you think it's easier, just get ethics approval. What will probably happen is if you don't declare it to an AREC, then they won't know about it, and then you just go out and you just say in the population data there was 10% Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, but we didn't analyse it. And so there's lost opportunity for us, because that would have given us some idea about whether the problem is in Aboriginal communities or whether it's big in Aboriginal communities. The other part of all that is, if for those people who do analyse those data sets, that 10%, they've got to be very careful they don't extrapolate that onto a larger population. So we found that 10% of Aboriginal people are one-legged, but then saying, well, we now know that there's this large cohort of Aboriginal people in Australia who are one-legged. So so there's two elements to it. One is not allowing us to get, because if you have a very strong methodology about how you're going to extract it and analyse it, it's not going to be harder to do it. It's just that there's this perception that it's hard to get ethics approval from an Aboriginal ethics committee, which is not quite true, but there's this perception still floating around. And of course, the second one is when you analyse that data, is making sure that it stays within the realm of your cohort, and that you don't try and make it out that it's bigger than Ben-Hur. That this thing here doesn't it doesn't show that there's. What it means is that if you've shown it in your research, then there's maybe more opportunity for us to go and do research somewhere else to find out whether that's the case somewhere else, or do a large scale research project that can look at that particular topics. So yeah, I think that third point is probably the one that we still have a lot of problems with. I read an article about 3 weeks ago where they had something like 20% Aboriginal population, didn't tell the AREC, and then got pulled over the coals because 20% is just a little bit too far away to say that it's not going to make any difference. And when it looks at, and it was around homelessness too, by the way. And of course, if you go to Northern Territory, 60% of the homeless people in Northern Territory are Aboriginal. So the population, overall the population has a large homeless population. and this is before the COVID. So large cohort of Aboriginal people who are homeless, but the random sampling that they did meant that they picked up 15%. Was it 15%? Yeah, I think they picked up 15% of their cohort was Aboriginal. And so that should have signaled to them that there was something wrong, because that we know what the data is in the Northern Territory around homelessness, and that should have also shown that they weren't sampling very well. But then to not analyse the Aboriginal data was also so. They've actually had their publication taken down. That they weren't allowed to publish until they've been able to explain some of these issues. I think the other one is like you go out and you make these great partnerships and relationships with the communities, and then you go off and you just exclude these people from any decision making. That you're the key researcher and it's your project, and you're just going to do this and do that. So I think that's a no-no. If you are going to have a relationship and partnership with a community, they at least are entitled to the discussion about what the decision-making process should be or is. Okay, so I think I suppose I'm just curious to know if there's any other. Does anybody think there's any other issues that we may be able to talk about, mention?
Hi, Alwin. It's Julie from Moree in New South Wales. We're kind of currently in the process of developing a research proposal, and without going into too much detail, we're sort of at the point where we're we've spoken to the Aboriginal Community Control Sector and the Health Department, Aboriginal Health Units sectors about forming Aboriginal reference groups in 3 different communities in our region to look at a particular research project. In one of those communities, we're just having a bit of difficulty, again, because of timing. You mentioned about the summer break, and we've had terrible delays with COVID because we weren't able to start consultation because COVID, people weren't allowed to meet. So anyway, there's been delays there. But anyway, so we're trying to just have our first meeting to see if the different communities are interested in forming the reference groups. One of those communities, or that we've sort of heard via the facilitators, is that communities are saying that there's a heck of a lot of health research going on in communities at the moment, and there seems to be a lot of different projects running around in this community, and people, different research places wanting to form Aboriginal reference groups, so that over-research, sense of being over-researched is kind of happening right now in a sense. And that's been a kind of a bit of a pushback that we're actually getting, because they're sort of like saying, oh, no, not another one. Have you got any have you heard of that anywhere much?
Yep, absolutely. We have, I mean, probably one of the little towns out of one little town, it's a big town, to Sejuna. It's also where the government wants to roll out the access card and a whole range of stuff. But same thing, everybody goes to Sejuna to do this research, and so it's not unusual to see 4 or 5 different research projects out there going at any one time. But look, I mean, it's very hard when you've got more than just one research project going on that you want to set up. Now, the setting up an advisory group is great. That's the way you want to go it, because you want more people to have more input into what's in the best interest of the community. But I think the thing that I don't know, given that there's small communities, it makes it very hard. I'm not too sure how you manage that, because if you try and set up another one, what you're going to do is you're going to have different people on different groups, and one probably doesn't talk to the other until they get home or start having a little gossip session somewhere. So is there any way for you to delay it?
Well, it's been quite delayed already. And the unfortunate thing is that, again, it taps into what you were saying about the key challenges and the best practice about extendable timelines and flexibility, because on top of COVID, we're now running out of our funding timeline. And we're just having, I just find it's just a very difficult thing to try and, I guess, negotiate, because we really want to, like you were saying, we want to find out the experience of Aboriginal people on this particular health. It's about cancer outcomes and experiences. But we're finding it hard to get to first base. And it's.
So I suppose I would still go ahead and try and set up the advisory group anyway.
Yeah.
Because I think you can justify. You can easily justify the need, and you can and given that if you have a very strong model, that's going to have and ask these questions, because I think it's just long as you are very clear about what you're trying to do to the rest of the community. People, if they say to you, "Oh, we already got a couple of those," people are going already. So I'd probably try and set it up again, but explain to the group about why you need to do it, and of course you can easily justify why you have to do the research, and go and talk to people about their experience or whatever it is about cancer. So, I mean, I still go ahead and do it if I was in that situation.
Persevere.
I'd persevere. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. A couple of people have had to leave, so I might try and get to these last 3 points that I wanted to talk about. Where are we? I wanted to give you three examples that have impacted on Aboriginal communities. 3 different types of, well, 2 of them impacted on Aboriginal, but one of them has had a secondary kind of impact on Aboriginal communities because it's about New Zealand. But I wanted to try and get to these examples, and that'll be the end of my session. But like I said, if you want a copy of these slides, I'm happy to send them over to you. All my references, I've put a group of references at the back of this, and you can go down and you can also go and look at our webpage, ethics webpage, for other resources as well, and the guidelines that the NHMRC have developed over the years. Okay, so the first one I'm going to get through these pretty quickly, because I think we're running out of time. How much time do we have? Do we have much time left? I can't see the time. Okay, so I'll try and get through these 3 pretty quickly.
We're about 10 minutes over, Alwin.
Oh shit! Okay, sorry about that. Well, look, if people want the slides, they can actually get this. But there's 3 examples I wanted to show you. But it's there's the Strela Collection, which a man was given all these artifacts and died, and mum and son thought they belonged to him, and had a big legal case over it. Mungo Man was found back in 1974, and the archaeologists picked the bones up and took the bones back to Canberra to analyse it. And so he said that there was no one to talk to, which wasn't true, because the Kenji and Muddy people were fighting for land rights at the time. So but then the other side of that is that we now can use those skeletal remains to say that Mungo Man is now the oldest ritual burial in the world, and from a social scientist point of view, what they can do is they can date how long Aboriginal people have been in Australia. So they go back 60,000 years ago. They then find out that how we got out of Africa and come through Indonesia. So so we're still fighting that, as opposed to Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal stories. But I think it was the ethical element of taking the bones, these burial bones, from where they were buried and taken. Prior to that, he'd found Mungo Lady, and then found others. But it's this one here that I wanted to talk about. This is the one that's been causing. Now, back in 2006, these two researchers did a little study in one of their communities in New Zealand. And they come over to Australia and they did a presentation at a ethnicist conference. And sorry, genealogist, geneticist, I can't even say the word now. They have genes anyway in Australia. And what they argue that they were misrepresented by everybody. And what it has done, these genes were known in America for a fair while before that. And of course, they then got dubbed the warrior genes. And of course, then all of a sudden, people are now saying that Maori's got this warrior genes, and this is why they get aggressive. This is why they get criminality. So there's all these looking for these genes now to find out and try and justify something. So the controversy, and it's coming into Australia in a different way, but 2006, and they haven't been able to put it to rest. So they stopped publishing. So they were going to publish about their research, and they said they didn't. Now they went through the right things. They went and did all these ethical processes. What they didn't explain was how they were going to disseminate their information. And of course, when they came out and started talking about this aggressive genes in human beings, it then got dubbed the warrior genes. And of course, it was not very long after the movie Once a Warrior came out. And of course, then everybody was talking about these. But I suppose the controversy, so these two researchers, they then carry this around with them for the rest of their life. And they argue that they got misrepresented. But then, then there's these other New Zealand who then are arguing that there's other things that lead to that aggression. And I suppose that's where in Australia we're trying to direct everybody to, so they misrepresented. And I think the third part here I put in here was that it's pretty contentious, but so when you look at the Maori MP, he explains that high unemployment, poor education, severe poverty, there's a whole range of social elements that lead to. In Australia, we've got a lot of young kids who are taken into the child protection system who don't get much help with they're losing tempers very quickly. So they have this, they lose their temper very quick and they don't get any help. So when they get out of the system, that just runs rampant, and eventually, they become violent or they go into the juvenile justice system. So this warrior gene, it's been, but what it has done in Australia here, it's actually led to more genetic research around with Aboriginal people. So one of the big issues that's still going on today is researchers are now trying to find these markers in our DNA. They're wanting to talk to Aboriginal people. They talk to Aboriginal people and say, would you like to get involved in our research? Because what they're trying to find out is if they can find these markers in our DNA for something like diabetes or Huntington's disease or cystic fibrosis, you can actually cut it out or turn it off. And so they're talking about manipulating our DNA, which is getting pretty close to the bone at the moment when you're talking about ethics. So it's something that's on the horizon. It's something that is coming up quite frequently now when you go to research, when you go to conferences now about talking about genetic research, about how it can help Aboriginal people. But the bottom line is, like the Maori MP said, there's all these other social elements that lead to. I think in Perth, they're doing a lot of research around rheumatic heart disease. Now, rheumatic heart disease is it's a poverty issue. It's caused by poverty, and then it blows out, and they're trying to get this biomedical model to try and fix it up. But again, it's a very close to the manipulating the DNA, finding these DNA markers that could actually switch it off. But if you help people get a better house, get running water, clean running water, and eat properly, you probably actually can wipe it out much more quicker that way. Anyway, so I think the warrior genes is something that I wanted to talk about because it's something that hasn't come to Australia in that sense, but it's come to Australia in the sense of genetic research in the DNA. Anyway, so thank you very much for everybody for listening to me. I'm sorry I went overboard. I thought it was going to be finished. The Ethics Hub is down, the link down the bottom. If you would like a copy of the slides, I'm happy to send them to you. I think they're not sacred material for me. I've been doing this for a little while now with these slides. It's just that I just don't understand my timing these days as I get a bit older. Okay, everybody. So thank you very much, everybody. So if you send me an email or send an email to Harley, and I'll be able to link and send the slides back to you. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day.